Well, welcome to the program today, and what a delight to have in the studio our very good friend, Dr. Marshal Foster. He's the president and the founder of the World History Institute, and we have him for the full hour to talk about a lot of the things as it relates to our history. He's also one of the premier Christian history historians, and if you've never been on the East Coast tour, which is really from, what, Plymouth Rock to Yorktown? Is that what you do?
Yeah, we go from, this one we're going to do from Virginia all the way to Plymouth and everything in between.
And then you end up at the Supreme Court?
Oh, we do it all, yeah. We're trying to overthrow them, but that hasn't happened yet. So.
Good to see you. How are you?
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you. Well, listen, a lot of things I want to talk to you about, but let's start with the 4th of July, one of the great days in American history. I've heard you say that of all of the days on the American calendar, you have Christmas and you have Easter, but 4th of July was to be a day of remembrance and thanksgiving and prayer as much as anything else, right?
Yes. Well, John Adams said from this day forward there should be national religious ceremonies and dedications to God for the miracle that's taking place here. So they understood from the very beginning that the Declaration of Independence, this was not just a time to celebrate, have a good time, and throw off some fireworks. Yeah. This was a time to remember that God had graciously liberated them from tyranny after 3,400 years of tyranny that had dominated the world. These colonists had the privilege to be the first people to have a constitutional republic since Moses had it in the time of the Hebrew Republic.
See, I don't think we're communicating that.
No, they don't. The significance of it is being lost on a generation that has never been taught the holy cause of liberty that Patrick Henry talked about.
The actual coming up with the Declaration of Independence, that event itself was a miracle, wasn't it?
Well,
I mean, it almost didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the idea that these colonies could come together, they were all different colonies. They didn't like each other in a lot of ways. There was complete divisions, north and south, different religious backgrounds, all of them Christians, but from different denominations. The fact that all of the events could take place when they did, before Washington lost New York, actually, before some of the bad things happened, at the same time after Boston had been taken. So there was a hope that, wow, we did at least kick them out of Boston. Maybe there's hope we could win this thing. They gathered together and signed that Declaration of Independence. And when they did, and those men signed the document, it was Samuel Adams, who was called the father of the Revolution, who on that day said, "Today we've restored the sovereign to whom all men are accountable. May his kingdom reign from sea to shining sea."
Yeah, I don't know. Your emotion is deeply felt, and I think that what we need to understand is that the price that our founding fathers paid to make this happen, I don't think we know that, or at least we forgot it.
We forgot it. The fathers, the brothers that were out there fighting and dying at that very point, the fact that it was impossible to win that war. More than just being an impossible war, because a lot of people fight when it's impossible to win for bad causes. Mm-hmm. They were not fighting because they wanted to, but because they felt it was a principled thing to do, and they knew they would probably lose the war, but they felt they had to do it because they were following Romans 13, that they would hold the magistrate accountable to the fact that he had become a tyrant. And they had understood, because their Bibles had newly been opened for the first time in 1,000 years, this book was unleashed into the hands of the individual. And this book taught them that God was sovereign, the king was not. And so they were willing to lay down their lives and die. So that of all those that went, I think there was only 5 out of the 56 signers that were not deeply affected either by losing a loved one or losing all of their fortune. But they paid a terrible price. And of course, if they would have lost the war, every one of them would have been drawn and quartered. Mm-hmm. Because that's what the English do. They did that to the Scots. They killed 40,000 Scots. When the Scots lost the war against the English and signed a national covenant, they took the names off the national covenant of the Scots and killed 40,000. So they would have done that to the Americans had they lost.
What is the glue that holds the Declaration together? What is it?
Well, that all men are created equal and they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. It all comes back down to one God, one Savior, one truth. And that is, we're all sinners, saved by grace, and only by the grace of Jesus Christ. And because of that hope and because of that equality before the cross, all men should have the opportunity to live free, to live under their own vine and fig tree, and have the freedom of conscience and the freedom of religion to do so. They believe that very strongly because this was a religious document. This was a covenant. This was not a political document like,
right,
right or left or liberal or conservative. This was a document that is very familiar with those that know of that period of time, the Reformation, or know biblical documents called the covenants of the Bible. When you made a covenant, it was before your friends and God, and you didn't break a covenant. When you get, we're going to be doing a marriage this weekend, right? Together, as we always do. And this is a covenant between this couple and God. It's a three-way covenant. And that's what they realized. The Declaration of Independence was a three-way covenant. The people were covenanting with God. God, if we will obey you, will you, by your grace, give us the ability to have a peace and happiness? All men should have what? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or pursuit of property is what it originally meant.
Now, there's some preceding documents that set the foundation. You got the Mayflower Compact, and these things as they came up to the Declaration of Independence. There is a theme there, isn't there?
Exactly. There's a theme that goes all the way back to Moses and can be tracked through the great freedom documents of Scotland, of England, of Holland. Those documents all came together through the Pilgrims, came over in 1620 on the Mayflower. Mayflower Compact is signed. And then the English Puritans are persecuted out of England, and the Scottish Presbyterians. They both come, and when they do, they set up these little communities all over New England and all over Virginia. And when they do, each of these communities then becomes its own little independent republic.
Right.
And they actually create their own self-government because they're 3,000 miles away from the king.
Right.
So for 150 years, they're able to develop liberty and freedom and justice without having an army, without having gendarmes. There were no, like Alexis de Tocqueville, when he came in 1838, said they have no police force.
Right.
They have no way to enforce these laws in the cities because they don't need to. They don't have a capital crime in these major cities for years at a time.
And the core to that is a morality. I mean,
it's morality.
It's morality.
It is. In fact, I was just reading this morning because I figured that subject would come up, and that's, of course, what George Washington said in his farewell address, that true religion and morality are the only foundations upon which we can build society. And, of course, what he meant by that, true religion meaning Christianity, and true morality meaning the character of self-government that enables you to govern yourself so that you don't need a tyrant or someone else to govern your affairs.
Right. So it's morality that makes you obey the law. It's morality that gives you the self-control that holds it all together.
That's right.
All right. So the Declaration is signed. What happens? They go out, and what happens next?
They lose everything.
Yeah.
They sign the Declaration. Of course, there's a great huzzah. And they read it in Boston, and of course he makes that great declaration about the sovereignty of God. And then Washington, in less than a month later, has to face off with 30,000 British, 20,000 of them marching on Brooklyn Heights. And he's got 8,000 soldiers, and he's surrounded, and there's no way, and that's his whole army. So Washington is surrounded, his army's losing, there's no way to win that day, and that's when we have the miracle that takes place in August of 1776, and that's when his army is saved by a series of things. The wind comes in and blows the British ships that were behind them out of the East River. A fog drops upon his army. Yeah. He's able to get a bunch of longboats and put 8,000 men on them in the middle of the night without the British, who are 100 yards away. He gets and crosses over and escapes, and only 2 people get killed or captured, and those are 2 that stayed behind to steal the baggage. It's a miracle. It's one of those many miracles that he begins to see, the miracles of divine providence that saved America when the war should have been over that night.
Right.
But again and again and again, Washington just lost 7 battles in a row. He lost skirmish after skirmish. He was down to 2,200 men finally that December of 1776. The war was over again, and they were ready for him. General Howe had 20,000 troops across the river. He's just waiting for his surrender. And George Washington says, gentlemen, this is what we're going to do. We're going to attack. And so he goes across a frozen river on Christmas night, and he attacks this outpost of Germans and actually defeats them and has none of his men shot. Only 4 of them freeze to death. And he's able to then win this great victory and then win another battle of Princeton a few days later, miraculously. And as a result, restores the spirit of the men that, yes, we really can defeat the English. And of course, the English didn't help themselves because Howe was an immoral man. And he wasn't even there with his army. He was out playing around with his ladies in New York. So you see that so much of history is written by God and then by the characters of history. And those that are willing to, as George Washington did, spend 7 years away from his home and his wife. Would be with his soldiers.
Well, we're talking about what this is all about. What is the 4th of July all about? What has been the price that has been paid for you and I to have freedom and liberty? Even though a lot of this has been scrubbed from our textbooks today, there is a divine, as you call it, the divine providence of God in the formation of this country, in the history of this country. When you hear about the odds, and I've often said God's odds are never fair. So you have George Washington with 2,200 against 8,000. That's not a pretty good. that's surrender.
Yeah, it's surrender.
But it ended up being victorious. Let me take a quick break. We'll get back. Dr. Marshall Foster is with us from the World History Institute.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Hi, we're back, and our honor today to have in the studio with us Dr. Marshall Foster, the president and founder of the World History Institute, one of the premier Christian historians of our day. What an honor it is to have him with us, especially on this day. And we're talking about the significance of the 4th of July and the overall founding of America and how God, through his divine providence, even though a lot of historians don't want that part of the story, there's no doubt that God had his hand in the formation of America. And you have often referred to maybe even some of Adam's quotes there, but this thing doesn't work unless there's a religious, moral people. And what we're dealing with now is if the religious and morality that comes from the scriptures, 10 Commandments, if that is being silenced, is being made as obsolete, then we have the chaos that we have today. But back there, the whole foundation of our documents, our Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, is held together, will only hold together through a religious and moral people.
Absolutely.
And by the way, that religious is the Christian religion, right?
Absolutely. They had no idea of a religion that was true religion, as George Washington said, other than the Christian faith.
Yeah.
They weren't talking about Ali, Ali, Akfri, let's all worship the native religions of whoever.
Yeah.
No, they knew what true religion was, because that true religion they knew had founded their freedom, had given them freedom in Christ, had also given them their physical freedom. And so they were willing to fight and die for that because they had developed that principle. And they knew that the great weakness of America, and this is what Washington warns against in his farewell address, he warns against the false philosophies of Europe that would come in and would infiltrate and destroy our character. And that's exactly what happened in the 1920s and 30s and 40s in America. We allowed the false philosophies of secular humanism, communism to come through the Frankfurt Institute, beginning in Germany, bringing it over through our major universities, rewriting our history books, and developing what they call the long march through the institutions. And they took out education, then they took out the media, then they took out Hollywood, and they took it one by one. They went after each institution in America with one basic purpose: to destroy the moral character of the people. Because once their moral character was gone, once their Christian faith was gone, you have no eternal standard for which to fight. And if you have nothing to fight for, you will be easily taken down. Mm-hmm. And they knew that. And so that's what they did to us very slowly. And I'm not blaming them. They're just following their cause, which is totally wrong and satanic. But how do you defeat a force like that?
Right. Right.
You become a moral and religious people who will stand for truth. And it only takes a minority, a very small minority, to stand in covenant together, and that minority can transform the world again, because people are looking for that today. Perry, you see it every day here on the, they're looking for people who are willing to stand for truth,
Right,
and put their lives on the line for it.
all right, so we move on from the declaration and the tough moments from that moment of signing that incredible document up to the Constitution of the United States. You had to go from the Declaration to the Constitution. And how much of the Declaration, spirit of the Declaration, you see in the formation of the Constitution?
Well, it's important. These are the two founding documents of America, and the one that is always forgotten is which one? The Declaration.
The Declaration.
People think the Declaration doesn't apply anymore. You talk to the average lawyer at a university, he'll say, don't talk about the Declaration, doesn't mean anything, that was all done away with. No, it wasn't. That was our founding document. That's the document upon which we build everything else, and the Constitution was simply a working document that simply limited the powers of the three branches of government so that the people could go about their job of evangelizing the world and doing their job of building a Christian civilization. That's basically the purpose. The idea of the Constitution itself being a document that you lifted up and thought it was wonderful. No, it was the Declaration you go back to. You commit yourself to the covenant. You know, all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. All men have the rights of what? Life, liberty. See, these are the fundamental principles upon which the society is built. You go back to the fundamental principles, and then you apply those principles in the building of the Constitution. Then you simply take the working points of the Constitution, and you don't lie to history or lie to the founders or lie to the truth. You say, this is what it says. If the president is not supposed to write law, the president doesn't write law, like our president is doing today.
Right.
The Supreme Court can't change the moral climate of a nation by deciding that we're going to kill 55 million babies. That is unconstitutional. They shouldn't be doing it. And the Declaration of Independence gives us, if it's the Creator that gives us our rights, which it says in the Declaration, how would the Creator give us our rights to kill 55 million babies? Mm-hmm. So well, it just doesn't, it doesn't fit. So you have to do away with the Declaration if you're an atheist or a communist or a socialist or any other religion, because you don't want that religious document. You don't want that covenant. But it's the covenant that gives you the strength of character. Every nation has a covenant. The covenant's either going to be with false religions, false gods, or it's going to be with the true God.
All right, so we're into the Constitution. And the Constitution, was it meant to be, if I can use the term, the law, the guideline of who we are as a republic, as who we are as citizens? Because what the move today is to say that it should be a living document, not a solid document. How do you respond to that one?
They had no conception of a living document. That was the living document is what they lived through ever since going all the way back to the times of Nimrod. Every king that came along, including Hammurabi and his great laws in the empires there in the Babylonian era, where he said, he put it up in we still have the obelisk, where these laws apply to you, but they don't apply to me or my royalty. And so my team gets away with whatever we want to do, but you guys live under these laws. Okay, well, that's the way kings had lived, and that's the way King George lived. That's the way all of the founders had known that societies were built. So the idea that you would have laws that could be then interpreted away by the powers that be because they say now there's a new meaning to them, it was anathema to them because they saw human nature as being the same, always fallen. They saw the basic fundamental principles as never changing. People say, well, we live in a different time. We're not in a rural society. It doesn't matter whether you're in a rural society or whether you're in a technological society. The principles of law and justice and freedom still apply. And the most important thing to them, remember, the Constitution was not a document to tell you what to do and how to do it, other than keep the government out of your life. Mm-hmm. It was a document to protect you from tyranny. And only if you were willing to hold their feet to the fire, and this is where the people come in. We have lost our Constitution, not because it's gone down the drain. It still comes up every day out of that safe. Yeah. The problem is not that it's not there. It's there, but the people, number one, don't read it, don't understand it, and they don't hold their representatives' feet to the fire to obey it. You kick a man out if he's non-constitutional. He takes an oath to that Constitution. And if he disobeys the Constitution, you simply diselect him. We have the privilege in a constitutional republic of not having to go to war every other year to do that, we actually get a chance to vote.
The mystery part of the Constitution, the mystery part is, if you look at them coming out from underneath the tyranny of the king, they declare their independence, which is an incredible act. I don't think we understand the impact of what they felt and had done and had accomplished by signing that declaration, and what they had now set themselves in for.
Yeah,
it was virtually the unknown. Where do we go now? You know, with God's divine providence. But the Constitution, we the people, that is a concept that doesn't fly in any other place in the world. There's no other place in the world where the people are in control, not some tyrant, king, potentate, or tyrant. And I don't know if we understand that. We, the people.
We, the people. And that's exactly right. We were given that privilege. And it's interesting that this is not a new form of government. Moses actually didn't set up a theocracy in the wilderness. When he was there at Mount Sinai, actually Moses set up a constitutional republic where we, the people, chose. God gave them an opportunity to vote 7 times while they were at Sinai, to vote for him and for his covenant. So the people, even in those days, under a God who loves us, were given the privilege to acclaim his law and to say, yes, I want to go with you. Well, that's what it is. In our case, we're given the privilege. We're treated as equals before the law and before God, and all of us get an opportunity then to vote. Will we or will we not pay the price of freedom so that we don't have to be under a king?
Right.
And to pay that price means we've got to take the reins of government ourselves, beginning with our own hearts, and say, God, give me the grace to govern my own heart. It was that famous quote by Hugo Grotius when he said it back 4 centuries ago. He said, how can a man govern a city if he can't govern a province if he can't govern a city? How can he govern a city if he can't govern his family? How can he govern his family if he cannot rule himself? And how can he rule himself if he cannot be ruled by God? So in essence, what he's saying is it all goes back down to you must let God rule your heart. Because if you don't, your heart will get out of control, and the human heart out of control is Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
And that's what the human heart becomes. And our modern humanist, secular humanist society does not want to admit that the big government that's growing in Washington, D.C. is no different than a tyrannical government that has grown throughout the ages. It's the same thing.
I find it interesting, Marshall, there's a spirit today of this pushback. We saw it in the UK leaving the EU against unbelievable odds, and the bombardment of the BBC, and plus all of the members of Parliament saying stay in. The people said no, we've had enough. In America, we're beginning to see the sense of the pushback. Isn't it interesting that the people want to abide by the law in the Constitution, but the government doesn't?
Exactly. Yeah.
What's that telling you?
Yeah.
So do we have that same spirit of revolution, you think, now beginning to brew?
We do. I think there's that sense of, heck no, I won't go,
yeah.
To put it on the radio terminology, or TV terminology. But I think, yeah, that's right. The only thing that, of course, concerns you is that you have a knee-jerk reaction on the part of people. Many times they don't know really what they're saying. It's in their hearts. They want to be free. It's like the English were saying, they want to be free. But wanting to be free and actually being able to hold on to freedom is different. As Benjamin Franklin said, as they left the Constitutional Convention, what form of government have you given? He said, a republic, madame, if you can keep it.
If you can keep it.
And it's up to you to keep it, which means it's not a matter of you going to war with your government because there's one law you don't like, or it's not for you to become some kind of a bigot yourself. You've got to live it out. You've got to pay the price and elect godly men. That's going to take generations. You've got to train your kids. You've got to work at it over a long period of time. Don't give me this short term, I've had enough. I talk to people. I've lived here. I know what's like. I'm not going to take it anymore. And I said, well, do you vote? Oh, not really. I don't vote. I don't get it. It's all rigged. Or I don't get involved in those. Do you get involved in city government? You work with your kids' education? Are you on the school board? I don't do that. I don't do that stuff. Who's your head of your school board? I don't know. But I'm going to get rid of those dogs. It's kind of like, wait a minute. If we're not willing ourselves to step in and govern ourselves, then someone's going to step in and govern for us.
All right. I got to take another break. We go from the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution, and then comes these 10 little things behind. And why were they added?
Yes.
The Bill of Rights. And we'll be right back with Dr. Marshal Foster in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
We're back. What a delight to have with us today Dr. Marshal Foster. He's the president and the founder of the World History Institute, giving us a history lesson today, a very passionate history lesson today. What the 4th of July is all about, what the Declaration of Independence is, the Constitution, what our forefathers went through. And really, this all stems from, just go back for a quick review, they had had enough. They couldn't worship the way they wanted to worship, and they risked it all to come to an unknown place to freely worship. And that part of our history is being scrubbed out of the history books, but it was a heart to follow God. That's what the origin of all of this is, right?
Exactly. And if you do away with religious liberty, which, by the way, has been done in every country before ours, and you look at the communist countries of the world, are you free to worship in China? Are you free to worship in these other countries? No, they do away with that as one of the first things. Why? Because they know that the one force that can defeat a tyrant is Christianity. You know, it was the great Spurgeon who said in the 1890s, he said, wherever the word of God is spread, spread and believed, a tyrant cannot long exist. And so they realize that when the word of God goes out, and people realize there's a sovereign and loving God who tells us that kings are representatives of the people and are and God, and that they have to obey the law also, then the people hold the representatives accountable. So what do the representatives that are there want to do? They want to cut off the ties of religion from the people so that people don't have that freedom anymore to criticize them based on their religious views. Right. And that's why, and it's always Christianity that is attacked. You'll notice, you're not seeing, Wicca is not being attacked by our government at this point. They're not going after a bunch of religions. They're going specifically after Christianity.
Unbelievable. All right, why the Bill of Rights? Why the 10 Amendments? What happened that they had to come back and insert these in?
Well, they had many of the founding fathers. They had the Federalists, the ones that really wanted the Constitution. They had to really fight to get enough states to come along, or colonies to come along and actually verify the Constitution. And to do so, they had to get men like Patrick Henry, who is the governor of Virginia. Patrick Henry was very much against the Constitution because it didn't give enough protections of freedom to the locale and to religious liberty and to these various things. And he saw tyranny coming. He saw that if you have a national government that strong, that national government, even though it may be good in this generation, would turn in a couple of generations to be King George again. Yeah. And so the only answer to that was to, as Thomas Jefferson said, bind the tyrants down with the chains of the Constitution. So by amending the Constitution before it even got started, really, and right. Now we're talking these 10 amendments or you don't get, we're not going to let you do this, right? Yeah, So you're going to go along with these, and then they added more right away, but especially those first two. You've got the first one is religious liberty. That was the major concern, was freedom of the press, but it was more than that, freedom of religion, to be able to proclaim the gospel, proclaim the truth, which is the liberating force that is the only thing that can defeat tyrants. If you don't have true Christianity being proclaimed, you don't have liberty in the hearts of the people, so you're not going to have liberty outside. And the second thing is you need to have a Second Amendment so that the people can protect themselves against the rise of tyrants, so that if they do rise up, it's not to hunt and fish. Where do we ever get the idea that owning a gun was about hunting and fishing? Fun to do and all that, but I'd rather fish with a line anyway, rather than shoot them in the river. It's a little more manly, you know what I mean? Than just spray them, you know, machine gun them. But the idea was to protect against a government that would go awry. And so the people had to be armed so the government wouldn't take away their weapons. The people of Europe are pretty much in real trouble because most of them have no weapons. They're not allowed to own weapons. So if the government decides a law that says all blondes are going to die, what are they going to do? Rise up with little, take out their laptops and fight to the death? I mean, they have nothing to fight with.
Well, it's very interesting because the whole of all of the Bill of Rights, of all of the 10 amendments to the Constitution, the one that's attacked the most is the first and the second. And you're saying that they wanted to strengthen the Constitution and strengthen religious liberty by adding those first two. Now, this brings up an interesting thing, and I'll just read this. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Stop. What's that mean?
Congress, number one, who's being addressed?
Congress.
The people or Congress?
Congress.
Okay, Congress is going to make no law. They did not want a state church. They just came out of a state church. They knew what a state church was. It's controlled by the state. They are going to control who the bishops were. They're going to control religion. They didn't want that. So you're not going to control religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof.
That's the next
free
one.
exercise in the marketplace, everywhere you want to say it, anytime you want to say it, you can say it. And so there was freedom of religion, but there was also a protection there. And so that was the number one thing. It was not freedom of the press. It was freedom of religion. That's the number one thing. And it was not a separation of the church from the state. It was a separation of the state from influencing and directing the church.
Okay. Now, by the way, the word religion there has been expanded in our culture now to include all religions, but primarily then it was for the influence of the Christian religion.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay. Or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of people to peaceably assemble. Now, the speech and the press part is really interesting because we're now seeing the attempt to control freedom of speech and freedom of the press is hate speech. That's the tool that they're using to come back to control that.
Exactly. In other words, they're not going for, see, up until the 1960s, it was, the free speech movement. I was there in Berkeley in the 60s when the free speech movement was getting started by Mr. Hayden, who was Jane Fonda's husband, and this SDS, and I was there with my long floppy Jesus hat preaching against it. But this is in the 60s, right? But what we were up against then is they were saying, oh, we want freedom of speech. We want to be able to cuss all we want. We want pornography. We want to be able to do whatever we want to do. On the one hand, that's what they were saying. Now that they are in positions of power, these same people that went out and got their PhDs, and a lot of them are tenured in the universities, or now they're at the top levels of government, are saying, what we want now is we want freedom of speech for those who agree with us.
Right.
In fact, that's what the Communist Manifesto ties into. It's called, what is it called? It's a narrow version of free speech. And those who agree with us should have the freedom to say what they want. But if you don't, then it's hate speech. It's against the truth. We can't allow people who believe in no climate change to go without penalty, or those that believe in anti-abortion positions, which is really so antisocial we have to put them through a training camp or something.
We'll run out of time. Let's skip over to the second one. By the way, the first one ends up with and the petition and to petition the government for redress of grievance. Okay, so the second one comes on a well-regulated militia. What does that mean?
Well, the argument has been, well, that only means it's going to be an army. It's only dealing with an army. The army should have guns, but the people shouldn't, right? That's the argument. Never did they mean that. Well-regulated, everything was local. It went back to Moses, if you want to know where it was. Moses said that every man should be armed and every tribe should be armed. And in fact, they didn't have a national army. They just worked and they brought the tribes together and they would fight a national war. The idea was, and the Swiss have the same idea, everybody is armed in their home to protect their family, and in their small communities to protect their community, and then they're brought together in a national militia if necessary. So it was not just taking away the right of private arms as the way it's being put today. Obviously the Supreme Court has actually ruled on this, but they won't go along with that. They're trying to limit it. This week in Congress they're bringing it up again to try to limit that.
This regulated militia, which is primarily the citizenry, obviously that's what you're saying here, it's necessary to the security of a free state.
Well, there's it. I mean, that is the necessary thing. They're saying that means a national army. It's saying exactly the opposite. You don't want a national army. A national army where it's this powerful force is what's called an empire. It's called the Roman Empire. They had 500,000 troops, the exact number of troops that we have today. We're in 40 nations. They were only in 22. The Roman Empire was never an empire like America's become. We should not be a world empire running around the world with our military. We should have well, if you come back to me, I think it should be an army in which the citizens themselves fight, and it should be for the necessity of national defense, and everything else should be done locally.
It does explain this. It says, and the right of the people, doesn't say the government or the army or the military. It says the right of the people to keep and bear arms. That's the person.
The right of the people. Isn't that interesting? How can they determine?
They're
turning that around. Say the right of the people should not be to own a assault rifle, which means simply a semi-automatic rifle, right? Which, of course, is the rifle of the day. In those days, they didn't have, quote, semi-automatics. They only had a Brown Bess or, you know, and the best rifle was owned by the people, right? You know, what are we supposed to do? We have swords and you have guns? Is that the idea?
Not be infringed, and yet everything we're doing is infringing upon this amendment.
Yeah, I mean, any kind of regulation is infringement. If you've not broken the law, then you should have the right to own a gun.
All right, we'll take another break. We'll come back. We'll wrap this up. But as we celebrate the 4th of July, our independence, that's a big deal. I would say that we have experienced something in our lifetime that has come to the closest of us understanding what our forefathers did in 1776. When the UK this week, the people rose up and said, we're out of the EU. Isn't that a declaration of independence?
That's exactly what the Independence Party president said the morning of the victory. We are declaring this will be forever our day of declaration of independence. Okay. That's right. It's going to happen here.
We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at theDove TV. You know, compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market. But at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Okay, we're back, and what a delight to have in the studio with us today Dr. Marshal Foster. He is the president and the founder of World History Institute, one of the premier Christian historians of our day. He does do Christian history tours on the East Coast, from Plymouth Rock down to Yorktown and everything in between. I guess you can go to worldhistoryinstitute.com and find out about all your stuff.
You got that? Tours of Scotland, England, around Germany. We're going to go all over the world in the next few years.
Okay, so he's also one of the, I guess, co-producers behind Monumental, and you're working on some more coming on that.
More coming, some more.
All right, we've talked about the best that we could to get a feeling for what our forefathers went through to separate themselves from the tyranny of the king, and to take the 13 colonies and bring them together and say, all right, we got to come together. We can't be independent. We got to come together. They make the declaration. They move it forward into the Constitution. Some of the founding fathers felt that the Constitution still wasn't strong enough to protect us from the tyranny of government or the freedom of religion, and so they added the 10 amendments to it. First one being freedom of religion, not from religion, and then the second one so that we can defend ourselves. We're now in a constitutional crisis in America. We have come to the point where we got a Congress that is passing laws that are outside the framework of the Constitution. We have an administration that is clearly tyrannical in its operation.
Breaking the constitutional principles of separation of powers.
Unbelievable.
Checks and balances.
So something really sad has happened to America. Something big has fallen through the cracks. Christianity continues to be demonized in this country. And yet we still have a huge faith community. And Marshall, I've been involved in a lot of battles. And every time we go out and we fight for the right to the life, we deal with traditional marriages, we deal with just common sense government, we deal with taxation, and the list goes on and on. We people of faith just get slammed down, 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 down. We haven't been winning anything. And so there's a low discouragement right now. And yet when you hear this history, God took this small band of people against incredible odds and gave them victory. Can we do it again, peaceably?
Oh, yes. That's the beauty. We'll be talking about that. We're doing a series this afternoon, and I have a series called Terror to Triumph, which is a 12 half-hour documentary on the history of the world from a Christian perspective, showing that whenever terrors come, the triumph is around the corner, because God does not allow his world to be taken over by tyrants, and he takes care of them. And I think that what we need to see is that there is a God who is just and loving and kind, and he's in heaven, and he has a plan of liberty for his world and for his people. And he's the third link. He is the third rail that controls politics and everything else that people forget about. And just to give you a couple of illustrations, how could you take a bunch of pagan people in Ireland who were called the land where monsters be? The Romans couldn't touch them. Nobody could touch them. They ate one another. They were involved in sex trafficking, and that was their life. And they fought in the nude, painted purple. And one man walks in with 12 friends and converts them to Christ in 35 years and turns them into a Christian republic, ends slavery, is the first nation to ever give up slavery. Wow. And he does it all in the 5th century. Wow. By the power of the gospel, without 1 ounce of blood being shed. He had no army. He had nothing. So the power of the gospel is more powerful than armies. Right. More powerful than false philosophies. And that's what's happened throughout history, that there are times when you must defend your liberty, like Alfred the Great had to defend against the Viking attacks. But that isn't what gave Alfred victory. What gave him victory was his personal character that allowed him, the people rose up and said, we will stand for God. And then they rose up and learned the Bible, and they learned to read, and then they developed what's called Christian civilization in England, and we end up with the King James Bible and the whole thing that happened. So everything we see throughout history, sometimes you have to fight, sometimes you don't, but ultimately, number one, it's in the hands of God. Number two, we as the church are his family. We are his ambassadors. I read one verse, it says, for God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, and he has given to us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, that God was in Christ and reconciling the world, taking all of our sins away and putting them upon his Son. Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were pleading through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. In other words, we're God's ambassadors, and we are together in covenant. And there are probably 80 million of us in this country. We're the largest single minority in the country. And we're not a minority that believes in racism or we're a minority made up of people who are of all different races who simply are covenanting with God. Lord, make us free. Make everybody free. And so if we will live in freedom in our own lives, live in freedom in our own families, live in freedom in our own churches, and then express that freedom the way we vote and the way we think in society, we will permeate the structure of our civilization much more deeply than any small minority of secular humanists who think they can dominate the world.
Do you think the faith community gets that? Do you think we see we're at that crossroads in America now, that the future of America, we can yell and scream, jump up and down about all the violations of the Constitution, and we can wave our fists at all of those elected officials that have let us down. But at the end of the day, do we feel and are we compelled to come back to God and say, God, man, we have really blown this. We need a biblical moment again in America. We need a divine intervention again in America. It has to come through some kind of a remnant of the faith community.
Exactly. And there's great hope for that happening. And it's up to us to see. And see, it may not happen in one time. A Billy Graham rises up and brings a great revival. Wouldn't it be great? But regardless of whether it happens in some big stadium, it can happen in our own hearts, one by one by one. And then we covenant with our neighbor. Be faithful in the little things and God will put you over much. This is a long-term battle. Remember, the enemy says it's a battle through the generations. We're going to take the institutions. We need to take a long-term battle of the kingdom of God and get our hope perspective back. That's why I teach history, Perry, because people don't know the great victory of the gospel through the ages when the faith community is simply faithful to God, does what they're called to do, and takes the kingdom into government, into education, into the media. And when we do, we have the predominant truths that are needed to liberate the people, and they become free enterprising, they become self-governing, the families come together, we have great prosperity, there's more babies being born, the society prospers when Christians are in control. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. When the wicked beareth rule, men hide themselves.
What is, given that responsibility and given the critical moment that we are in American history, What do you think the message of the church is today in America? Does it reflect that, or is it reflecting something else?
It either reflects a hopeless rapture fever, I call it, which is that, well, the things are really bad and they're going to get worse, and let me tell you why they're going to get worse. We even see that on a lot of the local media, where they'll give you so many conspiratorial theories and problems out there that by the time you've heard the local newscast of your latest conservative, you're so drunk with depression you don't even want to go anywhere. But if you look at it from God's perspective, and this is what history teaches us to, it was G.K. Chesterton that said, sometimes the long ago and far away will give us much more insight into the future than the here and now and than the emergencies of our daily life. And what's happened is that we are living in the emergencies of our daily life, and the church is preaching emergencies. Yes, we need counseling. Yes, we need individual salvation. Yes, we need to deal with our own personal sins. Yes, I agree with that. But at the same time, we need to develop God's big perspective and say, wait a minute, God, you're in control here. God, what do you want us to do? Not just to survive as a Christian community, but to help the people out there to literally be able to understand what true liberty and freedom is in every area. The Bible has been locked into a pietistic hole of an otherworldly emotion rather than the real standard for and matrix of liberty for the whole world. In government, in economics, in education, in every area, this gives the answer to how to build a free society. And our founding fathers knew that. That's the Declaration of Independence. That's what they knew. That's what they were protecting. The Christians need to get back to taking our Bibles and applying it to all of life, saying, Lord, now use this and our faithfulness and our repentance and bring us back.
Well, we're at this, just beautifully said, Marshall, we're at this point now in America. I will say a couple things. The National Day of Prayer this year was one of the largest attended across the country. I heard in excess of 47,000 prayer meetings took place on that day across the nation. Franklin Graham has been called by God. He completely erased his entire 2016 agenda and schedule to go to all 50 capitals in the state capitals to hold a prayer meeting. We just had ours in Oregon on Tuesday. The largest crowd ever on the North Capitol lawn happened to be a prayer meeting.
Wow.
And one of the largest gatherings ever on the U.S. Capitol Mall was the Promise Keepers prayer meeting.
That was the biggest.
So it tells me it's there if we'll just motivate it or send it in the right direction. It's there.
Exactly right. It's faith, it's Hebrews, because we have so great a cloud of witnesses, Declaration of Independence. Those fathers have gone before. Let us lay down the sin that so easily besets us, and let us run the race, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith. He will give us the victory.
Wow. Got about a minute left. What's ahead for you? What are you doing? You working on some more monumental stuff?
Yeah, we're doing a couple more movies that are really exciting, and so those are in the development stage for this year and next. We're working on further tours and seminars. We're working on, we've had a prayer ministry the last 2 years. Pray 31 has been 31 days of prayer before the election in 2012, 2014. We'll be doing it again this fall. We're going to get churches, tens of thousands of churches, to pray for 31 days before the election. I'm the national chairman of that. So we're working on all those projects and a lot of personal stuff with wonderful men like you.
Do you see a turn in the clergy of a sense of urgency to get it right?
I do. We were just last week, 3 weeks ago, Kirk Cameron and I went down to a meeting in Riverside, California, where there were 400 pastors. And they've got that group that is going around the country. They're meeting with 100,000 pastors this year. They've already got 200 of them running for office. And it was an amazing meeting. And the pastors were in unison. We're standing up, rising up, saying, if my congregation won't take public office, I'll become the head of the city council. And they're running.
Good, good. All right, again, you can go to worldhistoryinstitute.com. That's Marshall's website, and there you'll find a lot about the tours and all the things that is going on. Thank you, buddy. God bless you. All right.
God will do it.
Pray for America. Read the Constitution. Read the Declaration of Independence. Read the Bill of Rights. Turn it into a Thanksgiving praise on this 4th of July. We'll see you next time.